The rain came down in sheets that November afternoon, turning the city streets into rivers of despair, but nothing could compare to the storm raging in the heart of the man who sat huddled beneath the concrete overpass. Marcus had long ago stopped counting the days since he'd had a real home, since he'd felt the warmth of belonging, since anyone had looked at him as anything more than a shadow to step around. His weathered hands clutched a tattered blanket, his only shield against the cold, and his eyes held the weight of 1,000 untold stories. But on this day, those same eyes would witness something that would change 2 lives forever. She appeared like an apparition through the curtain of rain, a vision in white, stumbling in heels too high for the cracked pavement, her wedding dress dragging through puddles that turned its pristine silk into something tragic and broken. Marcus watched as she collapsed onto a nearby bench, her shoulders shaking with sobs so violent they seemed to tear through her very soul. The veil covered her face, but it couldn't hide her anguish. For several long moments, Marcus stayed where he was, knowing from years of invisibility that people like him weren't supposed to approach people like her. But something in her crying, something raw and genuine, pulled at a part of him he thought had died long ago. If you believe in the power of kindness, in second chances, and in the unexpected angels that walk among us, please take a moment to like this video. Leave a comment about a time someone helped you when you needed it most. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to our channel for more stories that remind us of our shared humanity. Marcus rose slowly, his joints protesting after hours in the cold, and approached her with the caution of someone who had learned that his presence was often unwanted. He stopped a respectful distance away and spoke in a voice roughened by disuse in the elements. He told her that he didn't mean to intrude, but he couldn't sit by while someone suffered so visibly, so completely. The bride's head lifted slightly, and though he still couldn't see her face through the veil, he sensed her surprise. In his hand, he held out the only thing of value he possessed, a small, worn handkerchief that his daughter had given him years ago, before everything fell apart, before the accident that took his family, before the grief swallowed his job and then his home and finally his identity. She took it with trembling fingers, and then she did something that shocked them both. She began to talk. Through her tears, the story poured out like a confession. Her name was Sarah, and just an hour ago, she had been standing at the altar of the grandest church in the city, about to marry a man her wealthy family had chosen for her. But as the ceremony began, she had looked into her groom's eyes and seen nothing. No love, no warmth, only calculation and cold ambition. She realized in that crystallizing moment that she was about to trade her entire life for approval, for status, for everything except the one thing that mattered. So she had run. She had fled down the aisle in front of 300 guests, past her furious parents, past her bewildered bridesmaids, and into the rain without destination or plan, knowing only that she couldn't go through with a lie. Marcus listened without judgment, and when she finished, he sat beside her on that wet bench, maintaining a respectful distance but offering the solidarity of his presence. He told her about his own story then, speaking words he hadn't voiced in years. He told her about the family he'd loved, about the drunk driver who had taken them from him one winter night, about how grief had consumed him so completely that he'd lost everything else trying to numb the pain. He told her about the years on the street, about learning to be invisible, about the slow process of accepting that this was his life now. But then he said something that cut through the rain and the cold like a beam of light. He told her that every single day he had a choice, to let his circumstances define him or to define himself despite them. He told her that running from a false life took more courage than most people would ever possess, and that the hard part wasn't the running but figuring out where to run to. They sat together for a long time, this unlikely pair, the homeless man and the runaway bride, and something profound passed between them in the silence. Sarah asked him questions then, real questions, about his life and dreams, and whether he ever thought about trying again. Marcus found himself answering honestly, admitting that he'd become so comfortable in his hopelessness that he'd stopped believing change was possible. She asked him what he would do if he could do anything, and the answer surprised him. He said he'd work with his hands again, maybe in construction or carpentry, the work he'd loved before everything fell apart. He said he'd find a room somewhere, nothing fancy, just 4 walls and a door that locked and a window to watch the seasons change. He said he'd reconnect with his sister, who he'd pushed away in his darkest days, if she'd still have him. Then Sarah did something extraordinary. She removed her veil, and Marcus found himself looking into the eyes of someone he recognized, not personally, but from the newspapers and billboards around the city. She was Sarah Chen, daughter of the tech mogul Richard Chen, heiress to one of the largest fortunes in the state. But in that moment, status meant nothing. She was simply a human being who had found another human being at exactly the right moment. She told Marcus that he had given her something priceless in that rainy hour. The courage to believe her decision was right, the reminder that authenticity mattered more than approval. And she wanted to give him something in return, not as charity, but as an exchange between equals who had both been brave that day. Sarah made a phone call, and within an hour her personal assistant arrived with dry clothes for them both. She told Marcus about a program her family's foundation ran, one that helped homeless veterans and others get back on their feet with job training, housing assistance, and counseling. She said she'd personally ensure he had access to everything the program offered, but only if he wanted it, only if he was ready. Marcus felt something crack open inside his chest, something that felt dangerously like hope. He asked her why she would do this for a stranger, and she smiled through her tears and told him he wasn't a stranger anymore. He was the person who had shown her that kindness still existed in the world, that sometimes the people society overlooks are the very ones who see most clearly. But if this story has touched your heart, if you felt the power of unexpected kindness or the courage it takes to choose your own path, please let us know by liking this video and leaving a comment. Tell us what this story meant to you. Share it with someone who needs to be reminded that change is always possible. Your engagement helps us continue sharing these powerful stories of human connection. 3 months later, Marcus stood in the doorway of his small but clean apartment, wearing the uniform of the construction company that had hired him through the Foundation's program. On his dresser sat a framed photo from Sarah's small private wedding ceremony, the one she'd had 6 weeks after the rainy day they met, where she'd married a teacher she'd known since college, someone she'd reconnected with after leaving her former life behind. Marcus had been there as her honored guest, no longer invisible, no longer defined by his circumstances. They stayed in touch, these two unlikely friends, bound by the moment when both their lives could have gone one way, but chose another. Sarah had learned that courage meant disappointing people to remain true to yourself. Marcus had learned that being seen, truly seen, by even one person could be enough to remember who you were beneath the layers of pain and time. Before we end, we'd love to hear from you. Please comment below with just one word that describes how this story made you feel. The rain still fell on the city streets, and people still hurried past each other without really seeing. But somewhere in that vast urban landscape, two lives had intersected and transformed, proving that sometimes the most profound changes begin with the simplest acts of recognition. One human being acknowledging another, one heart reaching out to another in the moment it's needed most. Marcus often thought back to that November afternoon, to the bride crying on a bench and the choice he'd made to be brave enough to approach her. He'd given her a handkerchief and some hard-won wisdom. She'd given him back his future. And in that exchange, both had learned that redemption doesn't always come from expected places, that angels sometimes wear tattered blankets, and that the courage to help someone, or to accept help, can be the very thing that saves you both. Some meetings are destiny, and some kindnesses echo far beyond the moment they occur, rippling outward like stones cast into still water, changing everything they touch.